Hey, good afternoon, everyone. This is Angelo Cianci with Fortinet. Both Tim and I would like to welcome you to today's webinar. We're excited that you took some time out of your busy days to join us. I know Tim is joining us from a snowy Washington, D.C. today. I'm here in a sunny, warm, balmy 32 in the Boston area. So. But we look forward to, appreciate your time, and we look forward to spending some time with you today. I think the main thing that we wanted to talk to you today was about securing security in the retail environment. And I'm going to kind of jump right into it and start talking to you about some of the things that we see. When we talk to a lot of customers, you know, we keep hearing about the changes in the retail industry. And when you kind of look at this slide that I have here, kind of broken it up into two areas. On the left-hand side, we're talking about some of the key objectives that retailers are facing, and then on the right-hand side, some of the obstacles. So when we talk to many customers and we talk about digital transformation, a lot of it really boils down to the use of technology and data, right? And when we start talking about technology, it's a variety of things. It could be IoT, could be cloud, could be mobility, AI, machine learning, security. It's just a variety of things that we're seeing in there from a digital transformation. And how you're going to use all of this to, more importantly, drive better business outcomes, increase profitability, increase sales, and more importantly, you know, add to the bottom line. At the same time, there are a variety of challenges that we're kind of seeing on the right-hand side, which is some of the complexity that we'll cover today during the presentation, right? You have your headquarters, your stores, large, small warehouses, kiosks, and a variety of other areas. And then with all of that, you're all under the, you know, how do we keep from a PCI perspective? So with that, we also kind of see what we talk to is what we see technology trends for retailers. A lot of data here, 4 key areas. Upper left talks about POS systems and omni-channel. Bottom left talks about the digital signage. We talk a little bit about wireless on the right and cloud offerings. Just to kind of give you an example of some of the things that when we talk to customers, you know, when we talk about wireless aspect, right? A lot of key aspects around guest wireless, right? What's the customer experience, and more importantly, how can you measure some of that or the analytics on the visits? The other thing that's really become prevalent that we see is a lot of what I'll call the tablet shopping, right? Where an associate can now just walk up to someone and, you know, with a tablet say, can I help you with the checkout? Or if they don't have a size, they can check with the inventory in their warehouse, right? The key thing on that is previously that was all done at the front end of the store. Now it's being done with that tablet or some kind of device there. All of that network traffic going across the network, and all of it has to be secure. And also from a digital signage perspective, the other things when we're talking to many of the retailers is, you know, sometimes we talk about all the great things that it can do for us, but in its simplest form, these are all computers, right? They're all connected to the network. And when you combine those two things, right, we were just talking about, they all become an extension of the attack surface that we see out there. And when we look at this, the attack surface continues to grow, you know, with all of these new initiatives that are coming out from the retailers. And from that, this is one of the things that we continue to see is that the cyber or that the retail landscape is under constant cyber attack. I'm just going to call out a few things here. Number one, if we go from left to right, you know, 67% of global companies have been breached over the last year. And again, this is referenced from 2018. 70% alone in the U.S. 42% have been breached during this past year. And I think the part that's most troubling is on the right-hand box, where 79% increased IT spending, and that didn't slow down the breach activity. You know, with that, when we talk to various CISOs, you know, the things that kind of come out, and it's like, well, there's a variety of things that have occurred. Sometimes there's like 30 or some vendors that people that customers are trying to manage. There's many point solutions. Many of them are not integrated. and there's just a slow response time. And what it kind of leads to is, unfortunately, some of these examples that I have here below, right? These are, again, not picking on anybody. These are just ones that were called out in that report. But when you look on that, when we talk to security, chief security officers, they always ask us, how secure are we and what can we do, right? So, with this aspect here, the other thing that we also hear and that we see is that, and this is true for most retailers, is that when this does occur, it's not a good thing, right? In summary, on this slide, I would just tell you, you could kind of look all the way back from 2006 to 2017 to see some of the largest breaches that have occurred. The key point here is when these things happen and when the publicity does occur, we end up finding out the two key tenets are it's a loss of trust and damage of reputation. Again, with those two things, just not a great place to be. So with that said as background, right? If that cyber, we keep bringing new devices onto the environment. We keep having, we're trying to do the digital transformation to add value to our company, and then there is this complexity. So how can we address this, and what are some of the things we can do? So I'm going to first, talk about a few things here. I'm going to reference this a little bit later in my deck, but one of the things you'll hear me talk about today, and Tim will talk a little bit about also, is something that we call the security fabric. And the security fabric is one of the things that we talk about, and the key tenets of it are that it's broad, integrated, and automated. So those are the three things that you'll hear from a Fortinet perspective. And from a broad perspective, we're always talking about we want to see the visibility of the attack surface. From an integrated perspective, we're talking about how do we do a coordinated and automated response. And from an automated perspective, we're saying is how can we enforce policies across all these channels. So I'm going to just spend a few minutes going through some of this here to just kind of show you what we kind of see out in the marketplace. And this is just an example. If I were to go to the center, I would say this is the traditional data center, right? And inside of that, there's a variety of applications that are running, and pretty much this is your core business. If I were to go to the far left, what I was trying to depict here is a store that, a little bit of a mid to large store, and then potentially even a restaurant on the bottom. Again, two examples of what you would see there. And then if I go to the far right of the slide, it's kind of what I'll see the public cloud perspective that we've seen that have come in. One of the things we find is that, inside of the data center is a little bit more structure as we move out to the stores and restaurants, a lot of new devices being added, mobile, tablets, switches, access points. And then when we talk about the cloud, one of the things we hear from many customers is just not one cloud, right? We find that most customers are telling us that there are anywhere from 2 to 3 different clouds that are out there. And the key thing about that is when you do have those multiple clouds, pretty much what you're doing is you're now having data in different locations. So now that the data resides in many locations, whether it's the store, the restaurant, transferring across to the enterprise or in the public cloud, security becomes a key perspective of this. So I just wanted to kind of show you some of the things that we kind of look at and how do we deal with this complexity. I mean, the first thing that we see that people start with, and that's why I've kind of depicted here with the red, is that we'll start to add firewalls. And firewalls is kind of like the first thing to try to help with the complex environment. And pretty much what it does is you start talking about things like network segmentation, adding controls and policies. Pretty much it's the first line of defense in the overall ecosystem. And then as we move along, right, with the introduction of clouds or virtualization, what we start seeing is that there's a variety of, and this is depicted in the blue, of some of the virtualization that occurs. The key thing when we are dealing with this is the virtualization does add a lot of flexibility for us, also adds a little bit of complexity. The thing is, we can use the same type of technology both in the private or the public cloud, and the main thing is what we try to make sure is that we're promoting and pushing the same type of policies. Again, it requires help in management. Another thing that we kind of see, kind of depicted in the purple, is what we call the advanced threat protection. What we see here is that what we start talking to various retailers in this aspect is, how do I start to protect from the edge to the endpoint? Usually these are customer specific. I think the key thing that we try to talk about is when we start adding these, again, we're adding another layer of complexity. So if we're adding that layer of complexity, how do we start to integrate and talk with all of these devices? The other thing we see, and as we continue to build this slide, is what's added in blue from an application perspective. One of the key things we'll see is that customers start adding web application servers or potentially denial of service attack devices to help protect. Again, these are depending on the scenario and depending on how you want to set it up. Again, adding another layer, and more importantly, how do we have these all integrated and talking to one another? And then probably the last component of this is what we see, and this is a real growing area for us from a Fortinet perspective, is the secure access. And this is when we're talking about adding things like access points so that you can do wireless in the store, adding switches, adding 3G, 4G backup. The main thing is, as you continue to add all of this, is how do you take and make sure that the similar policies, the similar controls, and the similar aspects are all added into that. And if you look at all this, we were just kind of looking at this from a security fabric and Fortinet perspective. If you kind of go back to what I said earlier, it even gets a little bit more complex when you have 30-some vendors or more that various retailers are dealing with. This is just an example, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this, but when you look here, this ecosystem, though it gets more complex, we've been working with all of these different vendors from a Fortinet perspective to help make this a little bit easier. But with that, I also wanted to kind of now also kind of reference what we are kind of seeing from a network perspective. So Tim, do you want to jump in from here and talk about what we see from a complexity perspective on the networking side?
Sure, thanks, Angelo. So I really appreciate that very thorough kind of description of the layers of security. So everything from the endpoint to the firewall, to the cloud, to the data center. And as we start thinking about specifically the store, one of the things that for many retailers is that we're looking at a fairly large footprint, perhaps a few hundred, maybe even a few thousand locations in a nationwide type rollout. And the very first question that comes up is, well, how do we connect all the stores to all the resources that they need in order to achieve the business results that they're trying to? And what we're seeing here is that there's a wide mix of options and capabilities, and particularly as it relates to kind of larger footprints, larger deployments at scale, it's never a kind of a one-size-fits-all. And in many cases, it's a mix of different types of accesses and different types of connections. We are making a transition now from a world of T1 MPLS being the norm to now a transition to broadband and managed SD-WAN solutions. And underpinning all that from the transition to the T1s is we're looking at, for the very first time, your typical IT practitioner now is looking at connecting all the stores with broadband connections. So cable, fiber tends to be kind of the favorite solutions that we're seeing as the primary solutions. But you can't always get cable everywhere. There's usually a meaningful, call it 30% kind of gap, if you will, where there's a significant portion of the network that can't get actually the kind of access that the norm is looking for. And then that begs the problem of, well, then what do you do for these kind of fill-in areas, if you will? And what, particularly as it relates to a customer experience and maintaining a high-quality experience, you can't have customers go to 70% of your stores and have a wonderful customer experience, but visit 30% of your stores and have a mediocre or unsatisfactory experience, particularly as it relates to their mobile app or to their guest Wi-Fi experience, or even for your employees for that matter. So the big challenge that we see in retail is that underpinning all of the digital experiences and all the technology that's coming into the store is the network's impact. And the big challenge here then is, how do we provide a consistent experience across an entire footprint, a nationwide footprint for the locations? What this begs to and points to is we're going to have a mix. Perhaps it's cable and fiber, as kind of alluded to earlier, tend to be the favored solutions. Cellular is very common now. We're seeing with a lot of retailers insisting on that as a backup to the cable offering. we've, for many decades, have been able to do offline credit card transactions. But when we enter a world of loyalty applications, there's no such thing as redeeming loyalty points in an offline mode. There's no such thing as mobile orders and taking those in an offline mode. You have to be connected. And so we're seeing a lot of retailers and even restaurants making the transition now and insisting on high availability kind of backup connections with an LTE type of solution. What's interesting is now DSL is still very much a prominent solution because of its coverage and as a fill-in solution. And so now, as kind of alluded to earlier, the question is, if the standard for a retailer is a 20 by 20 cable experience or a 50 by 50 cable experience, how do I create an adequate or a satisfactory customer experience and employee experience for sites that can, the best they can get is a 16 by 2 or a 3 by 1 even kind of DSL scenario. And so this, when we start thinking about all the different types of access methods, it begs now the question of how do I manage, particularly for normal nationwide type deployments, how do I handle all the different type of providers that may be engaged? And this actually creates a massive logistics and operational headache. A nationwide deployment for many retailers could easily involve 50, 100 different suppliers that could meet all the network and connectivity requirements. It's 50, 100 different bills that need to be aggregated every month. It's 50, 100 different suppliers that need to be escalated to when something goes wrong. And so a lot of the challenges that we're hearing and seeing now is with all the different access methods that need to be employed in order to try to achieve the most effective customer experience is how do you succeed? And this is just speaking to how do we connect the stores? How do we get the an adequate experience, an adequate architecture, infrastructure to support all these digital experiences for the stores? Now, the connectivity is just the bottom line. When we think about the IT infrastructure and the stack at the store, the transport is just the beginning for the store IT stack. Then we look into the routing protocols, the quality of service, security, as kind of Angela alluded to, the switching infrastructure, the VLAN configurations, the Wi-Fi, the guest Wi-Fi, the employee Wi-Fi. All of this kind of rolls up into a support infrastructure for that human experience in the store, for the customer, for the employee, voice over IP, digital media, digital signage type solutions, and even the retail analytics. And so what we're seeing right now is in the store is a fairly meaningful, fairly complex IT stack that's evolving. And so as we think through all the dimensions and the layers of security, as we think through all the connectivity options that are available in the store infrastructure, and then we think through at the IT stack in the store, we've got a fairly meaningful challenge in terms of how do we support all this stuff. And we want to keep in mind the end goal here. The end goal here is that human experience in the store, the customer experience, the employee experience. I'm doing a simple demonstration here of the same circuit with the same congestion, but two dramatically different experiences. A 2-second experience on one hand, a 24-second experience on the other. You know, when it comes to infrastructure, you don't always control the kind of access and connectivity that you're able to achieve at a store, but you always control how you use that connectivity. And really, as we start thinking through this storyline, we want to think through the end game. We want to keep everything in mind in terms of, at the end of the day, it's measured by that human experience, the customer experience and the employee experience. So we have a couple of thoughts that we'd like to share with you as it relates to kind of simplifying all this complexity. Some guidance that we could offer as we've been working with a number of retailers, a number of restaurant customers too as well, in terms of saying, well, it's not enough just to describe the problem. We need to solve the problem too as well. And so the first thing that we would offer is start by thinking about how do you simplify your architecture and your infrastructure. There's obviously a lot of different functionalities from an IT perspective that needs to happen in the store. But we don't need to be operating in a world where 5 different boxes do 5 different things. We don't need a firewall, one box for the firewall, one box for the switch, one box for the WAN optimization, one box for the routing protocol, so on and so forth. We want to look for areas where we can start to simplify. Every time we add a box, we add another potential point of failure. Every time we add a box, we add another device that needs to be supported, another device that needs to be inventoried. So maybe a first beginning point is to look through your store infrastructure and start to think through, where can we start to consolidate? Where can we start to fold multiple applications, multiple capabilities into a multifunctional approach into the boxes, if you will, that we deploy at the store. Angela, do you want to speak to the security fabric?
Yeah, I certainly will. Tim, before we do that, I just want to just go back, I mean, just one slide. I think the one thing that, as you mentioned about this integration piece here, I think the one key thing just to draw out is that, you know, in working in conjunction with Hughes Networks, you know, we have come up with this one single box solution. And I think the one thing, and I highlighted it briefly in my section, but we do have this entire Fortinet security stack that's built right in. So it's the combination of all of the networking that Tim had talked about. It's the combination of the security services, and then it's all built into the one solution. And then I think, as Tim was saying, is, you know, how do we help reduce this complexity? I think we do it, and again, I mentioned earlier with the security fabric. You know, I mentioned the three key tenets that we had talked about before, about broad, integrated, and automated. And I think what I would want you to take away from this is, in working in conjunction with Hughes Networks and the work they've done with us, but also in working in what we're doing from a security fabric perspective, is, you know, from a broad perspective, you know, it's the visibility and the protection of the entire digital surface. I think this is really critical. I think we had mentioned, when I mentioned earlier in my presentation, you know, most corporations are dealing with 30+ type of devices that are not integrated and do not talk to one another. More importantly, from our perspective, we think that a key tenet is that you have to be able to see those devices, you have to be able to see them on the network, and you have to be able to work with them. From an integrated perspective, is we believe that they need to be integrated and share of information so that we can help work and detect advanced threats. And then from an automated perspective, there's some certain key things that are occurring that we can now start to do response and continuous trust around this. So when we see something occurring in the fabric, and we see something occurring between two different threat vectors or two different devices, we can start to auto-populate that information to make sure that everything is when we see something occur, some new threat or some new malwares, that we bring it in, we ingest it, we take it, maybe it starts in the data center, we validate that it is a threat, we take that and we do pass it out throughout the entire ecosystem that we had talked before. So that's really the key thing that we think is critical in working in this environment. Tim, back to you now from a management perspective.
And as we think about managed services, we want to think about all the disciplines of what it takes from a holistic perspective to keep all of this technology running. So think from a life cycle perspective. This is from the design and the testing of prototyping kind of new technologies, to the installation and the configuration, to the operations, to change control as we look through the field maintenance and keeping when something goes wrong, how do we fix it? And then even customer care and providing the operational support when something goes wrong, either for the employee or for the customers. So as we think about managed services, it's that whole discipline of, we have a massive amount of technology that's coming into the stores that's going to touch. It's now a question of, you know, before where it was as simple as just maintaining a credit card terminal and perhaps a point of sale machine. Now we're thinking through all these different devices, from Wi-Fi access points to digital signage players to TV monitors even. There's so much technology that's coming in, and every time something fails, we end up with a dark screen, or we end up with a compromised experience for our customers. And so as we're starting to think through from a managed service, the question that we're asking is, how can we make this easier? How can we take all these technical requirements and from today's purposes and today's view, as well as tomorrow's, as we look down the road to just even more devices and more sensors, Internet of Things type basis too as well, as we think through what we have on our plates today, and as we think what's coming down the road in a couple of years. The question is, how can we simplify this, and how can we do this on a larger scale? And so as we think through all the different individual components. A managed services play becomes a very effective way of dealing with all of this technology. Instead of having a multitude of vendors, and perhaps one vendor for voice over IP, one vendor for a digital signage solution, one vendor for the Wi-Fi, another vendor for the network and the routing, start thinking about, very similar to the earlier point as it related to IT functionality of the stack, start thinking about, instead of having 5 different vendors doing 5 different things, how can I start to consolidate this? How can I start to reduce the burden of all these different disciplines and simplify, not only from an internal perspective, and i.e. offloading it to a third-party resource, but also simplify it from the relationship with the third parties. And instead of 5 or 6 or a dozen different third parties, start to consolidate it down so that I can have one or a few service providers basically maintain and manage a multitude of different disciplines. It's far more effective now to be able to send one field technician out to a site and be able to fix a Wi-Fi problem, fix a media problem, fix a network problem, or whatever the case may be. And similarly, from an operational perspective, there are advantages to being able to have kind of one operational team, not only being able to kind of manage and keep up to speed of what's going on with the network, with the security, with the Wi-Fi and the media players, having one team basically kind of keep an eye on everything, as opposed to having independent vendors kind of pointing the fingers at each other, saying it's their problem or that problem, as the case may be. So as we think about consolidating the functionalities from the earlier slide, we want to think as it relates to managed services, thinking about the whole life cycle, all the way from cradle to grave, from the design and the initial testing and prototyping of new solutions, all the way for installation, field operations, field maintenance, and customer care. We want to start thinking about, how can we simplify this? How can we simplify the technology by letting other third parties contribute their cycles, their expertise, to kind of offload some of the internal burdens of maintaining all this technology, but then also think about how we can simplify from an operational perspective and a cost perspective too as well, of maintaining all this technology. So as we think about really what we're talking about here is this idea of managed secure SD-WANs type services, specifically as it relates to that element of the network, because it's getting so much attention. We thought we'd offer some additional advice specifically as it relates to secure SD-WAN. Secure SD-WAN begins with the best-in-class security. I think it's we have a lot of providers, a lot of vendors out there who are just talking about a lot of homegrown security solutions or leveraging third parties. When it comes to secure SD-WANs, our recommendation and encouragement to retailers is to really think through the security. We know that this is the Achilles heel of retail networks today, and so you really want to not just look at self-determined or self-acknowledgments of their secure solutions, but industry-vetted solutions that actually have been put through the ringer, that you can actually trust the assessment, not only of where it stands today, but also where it's going tomorrow too as well. Security is not a static quantity. It continues. The threats against the network, the opportunities against the network continue to evolve as we introduce more and more technology. And as such, our security needs to continue to evolve in order to keep up with that. A fully managed service delivery, kind of as alluded to earlier, looking at trying to find ways to offload the meat and potatoes of keeping the operational infrastructure for a retail network on delay. For all the retailers that we're dealing with, there's simply too much work to be done with the existing resources that are available. And so what this really is begging for then is offloading the things that can be given adequately to a third party, so that all the in-house IT resources can be really focus on the innovative IT work, technology strategies that are required to prepare the retailer and the brand for the future. The enhanced end user experience, as we kind of alluded to earlier, the end user experience in the store is being dictated by the technology. And when the technology works, it's a wonderful experience. When the technology doesn't work, it becomes a very awful experience. And so, for the first time, I think IT is getting a very front and center role in defining that customer and user experience in the store. And this is a huge responsibility where it's not very forgiving. Employees can tolerate an outage here and there. Customers are very unforgiving with their experience. So it raises the bar in terms of understanding how our technology strategies affect the customer experience in the store. Application assurance and performance, this speaks to the ability to control and be able to intelligently manage. There's too much stuff that needs to be done with too limited resources. And in those kind of situations, what becomes vitally important then is to be very intelligent about how you use whatever resources we have available from a networking and connectivity perspective with the entire application load that we're dealing with. And so how do you provide and protect properly prioritize and protect those high priority applications over the lower priority ones that are a little bit more forgiving? And then at the end of the day, success and even call it a competitive advantage comes from being able to kind of lower the total cost of ownership of this technology stack that we have in the store. The more dollars that we can free up for additional investments, it just translates into additional opportunities to redefine that customer experience in the store. So specifically as it relates to managed, secure SD-WAN solutions, it presents an opportunity to take what has been commonly viewed as essentially a utility, a commodity, if you will, that's a part of the store infrastructure, and turning it into a competitive differentiation. If a brand can do something with their store network that another brand cannot, then they can create a competitive advantage for their customers in terms of a customer experience that other brands cannot match. We wanted to give another, in terms of some additional advice as it relates to the complexity. Another area to highlight is the network analytics. And what we mean by this is when we engage and when we talk about a managed service, a managed network service, we're not talking about just giving up all rights to the network. Actually, we're talking instead of there's still a need for visibility. There's still a need of accountability and an ability to understand. We're in an age right now where there's simply too much data, and your ability to take action on that data is really delimited by your ability to interpret and visualize the data. So as we think about the analytics that are available to us, we want to start thinking through, what does it take for me to get the insight that I need to make good operational decisions? Take an example, a 1,000-store retailer who has ordered 20 by 20 cable service to all of their store locations. As a retailer, would you be able to know which of your stores are actually experiencing a 50 by 50 cable, or which of those stores are actually experiencing less than a 5 by 2 or 5 by 1 broadband type of experience? It's the same order across all the stores. But all IT practitioners know that just because you got the order in, it's always an up to, and you never really actually know what's going on in the stores until someone calls and says, hey, my applications aren't working, or hey, my point of sale transactions are taking too long, or hey, the employee video training is too disrupted that it's just unusable. And so a lot of the challenges when we talk about advanced network analytics, we're talking about more than just simply saying, is it up or is it down? It's understanding what kind of congestion levels am I seeing throughout my nationwide footprint. Which stores are suffering routinely? It's that classic problem of why is everything green and yet everyone's still complaining? Well, everything's green because technically everything is up. I can ping, I can access devices and applications that are in all the store locations. Everybody's complaining because everything, even though the connection is up, the user experience is awful because it's congested, because it's filled with traffic and we're experiencing point of sale transactions that are taking 20 seconds, 30 seconds, even timing out and having to be redone. All the while, everything is still green. And so I think the classic problem that we're seeing today is, well, if that is the biggest problem in the digital experience and the customer experience in the store, that how do we manage congestion? How do we get the analytics that we need so that we can understand the difference of an entire deployment of everybody's ordered 20 by 20, but we understand the difference now of those stores who are experiencing 50 by 50 and are doing great versus those stores who are experiencing routinely, less than 5 by 5 and need help. And so when we talk about advanced analytics, it's trying to extract more data to make good business decisions, again, with the limited funding and resources so that we can apply our resources appropriately and make the investments that we need. Above and beyond that, it's the meat and potatoes of keeping everything up and running. when something goes wrong, when we think about field maintenance, it's more than just having adequate coverage and having, a good response time in terms of getting people on site in a timely fashion. It also speaks to the inventory management. It also speaks to the technical expertise of the technicians on sites. And as alluded to earlier, the scope of being able to support. It's one thing if a technician can only support and troubleshoot a broadband connection. It's much better if a technician can go out to a site, fix a broadband problem, troubleshoot a Wi-Fi problem, even resolve a digital signage or a media player issue and the like, or even troubleshoot and actually fix a voice over IP. And so the idea here is to say that, hey, when we think about field maintenance and coverage, and all the other operational disciplines for that matter, installation, call center too as well, we're wanting to think about this in a holistic manner and saying, where can I get the visibility, where can I get the coverage, where can I get the capability to scale and simplify the support infrastructure from managed services. And so these are a lot of the kind of benefits that are bringing to bear. So some last things to kind of think about is, as we kind of close this out, security is not a static quantity. The threats against our retail networks continue to evolve, and they continue to become more dramatic in their impact against our brands. So we want to not only understand a snapshot of what is today considered to be a reasonable response and a reasonable investment in terms of protection, but we also want to keep our eye on where is this evolving to, and kind of where is this headed, and how do we stay at least a couple of steps ahead of where the threats are so that we are anticipating and appropriately and responsibly managing and protecting our brand's data and, more importantly, our customers' data, as Angela alluded to earlier, to preserve that trusted relationship that we have with our customers. We want to think about how to simplify that store infrastructure and architecture. The key, if the key to the customer experience is technology, then the key to success with technology is how do we simplify the operational burden and that's implied with all of this technology. How do we do this at scale, and how do we do this on a cost-effective manner? We want to think about the managed secure SD-WAN type solutions. The networks of yesteryears, from decades ago, these were very simple networks. As we look over the past many decades, it was just a simple thing of, providing credit card transactions, protecting a closed network with credit card transactions and overnight polling. We're now in an age where all retail networks need to be opened up. They have to in order to be able to provide all the access to the cloud, all the access to the loyalty applications, all the access to the experiences that the customers are looking for. And so it's an open network architecture now that we're dealing with in the store infrastructure. And because of this dependency on the cloud, that network becomes a bottleneck for the end user and the customer experience. And then finally, as the last and probably perhaps the most important, managed security services. Think through the security. We want to not only maybe it started with it and I ended with it, and perhaps in the repetition is the emphasis. You can't understate how important the evolving threats are and the cost of the breaches, as Angela alluded to at the beginning of this. We are going to continue to have this continual ongoing battle and contest to preserve and protect the integrity of our brand against the threats that are out there. So these are our thoughts to share with you today. Ashleigh, I think I can turn it over to you now.
Yes, thank you, Tim. That was a really great presentation, and the information delivered today was awesome. So thank you both. Yeah, it looks like we did have quite a few questions that came in. And I'd like to remind the audience that we do appreciate all of your questions. And if we're unable to get to them today, we'll respond to the email that you provided. So let me go ahead and jump in here. Let me find one here. So Tina is saying, you mentioned earlier how security and complexity go hand in hand, and that's a major problem. What have you seen other retailers doing to solve these challenges?
Yeah. Hi, this is Angelo. I think when we're talking to many of the retailers, I think it kind of comes back to how do we reduce that complexity. And I think the the one key thing that we continue to bring out is trying to put a single device in there that has the security built in, has the SD-WAN capabilities that Tim had talked about earlier. And I think you take that and then you also embed our security fabric in that. And the key reason is when you embed our fabric, it allows us to provide a broader view, as I had mentioned, against not only the retail site, but also all of your connectivity across the network. So it's a combination of the single device, the fabric that provides the broad, automated, and integrated view of your network, and then more importantly, if there is some kind of challenge that occurs, it's the ability to respond quickly.
Great, thank you. So this next one is from Sean. He's saying, so SD-WAN was brought up quite a few times in this presentation, and he'd like to know what is the most important thing for retailers to know about SD-WAN?
This is Tim. I would say that probably the first thing to know is that term SD-WAN has become so diluted. I mean, it would be, I was trying to think of a good analogy. When we say, for example, the term minivan, that speaks to a very particular model, a make of a car. But if that term minivan were applied to a four-door sedan or to a pickup truck, the world would get very confusing. And when we look at SD-WAN, we're kind of in that world where everything's being called a minivan, and the retailers are kind of left thinking, okay, what exactly is it that I'm dealing with? And so I think the first thing about SD-WAN to understand is to, as they start to look through all the solutions, is to really understand what is it that they're looking for in terms of what do they need the solution to do. More importantly then am I getting an SD-WAN solution, is what is the feature and functionalities that I'm looking for in here? Is it the architecture, being able to have an orchestration layer where I can kind of manage everything from the cloud? Is it being able to handle the specific issues like the congestion issues, the brownout versus the blackout type of issues? Is it being able to manage my application flows over multiple paths? So I think the first thing and foremost of SD-WAN is perhaps understanding what features and capabilities do you need from the solution, and then focusing on those. There's too many things that are being called SD-WAN today to use that as the delimiter, and we need to know, because of that, we need to focus on what are the capabilities. When it comes to SD-WAN, I would very much encourage retailers to very much stress test the solutions that are out there. We are in a world, from an IT practitioner perspective, we're making the transition from a T1 MPLS to a broadband world. Broadband's wonderful in the sense that it provides a dramatic amount more capacity for a fraction of the cost. But broadband is very, very different in terms of its volatility and in terms of its performance. And in order to achieve that consistent enterprise-grade application performance, retailers need to design compensations for dealing with the volatility that's just inherent to broadband. And then the last thing as it relates to SD-WAN is the visualization of data. It's kind of alluded to earlier. A key ability to taking action and being able to make effective business decisions on what's happening in the stores is being able to operationalize your data. And your ability to operationalize your data is so dependent on how you visualize. We live in a world of gigs and gigs of data that we can potentially extract from our networks. We need to make sense of that in order to be able to get business benefit and business value from it.
And Tim, this is Angela. The only one last thing I would add on to your whole answer regarding SD-WAN, which was great. I think we also, going back to the complexity thing, is when we talk collectively, we always talk about secure SD-WAN. And again, when you are making considerations out there, having a single device that has the security built in with the SD-WAN capabilities allows for a total solution versus adding another piece where you're managing network and security. So I think that is complex. I mean, I think that's really critical also. Ashley, any other questions from the audience?
Well,
I'm sorry, Tim.
And I would also throw in there that there are many different philosophies out there too as we think about security in the SD-WAN type context. There are solutions that rely completely on the cloud, where you're running all your traffic to a cloud-based resource to try to clean and protect your content. There are on-premise solutions where the security is basically inbuilt into the CPE. And these two different philosophies, if you will, come with different strengths and different weaknesses, and also give you different abilities. Where a cloud-based solution provides the convenience of running it out to cloud, you have the metered-based type of approach because of just the nature of running content running to the cloud. The on-premise, you incur the licensing of securing that device, but then you also you have the ability and the freedom now to basically run directly right from the store out to the internet in a protected fashion. And so as you start thinking through your strategies in terms of what you need to do as a retailer, in terms of supporting all the different types of applications and experiences in the store, you also want to start thinking through the various secure SD-WAN solutions and secure methodologies that are available to you too as well.
Thank you. Really, really thorough answer there. Thank you, guys. And I like the analogy that you gave, Tim. So we do have some time for a couple more questions here. This next one is from Cole. He's asking, what are some of the key security considerations that you've seen your customers evaluating to help reduce the breaches and increase their security posture?
Yeah. Hey, this is Angelo. Great question. I think that the key thing that we're seeing, especially with respect to reducing the breaches and time to respond, is that the integration of the products. I think over the years, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, many customers are running 30+ some solutions out there versus one integrated solution. I think it's the capability of having a solution or a fabric-ready type of security fabric-ready type solution. I think one of the things we did, and I think I saw that you saw it earlier in the slides, we have 50+ vendors throughout the security, or what I'll call partners throughout the security industry that we've worked with and teamed with, right? So that we are in conjunction working and sharing data, threat intelligence among each other, so that when a new threat occurs, and these threats continue to evolve, some new malware happens, we can take that information, we can ingest it, we can make updates on the Fortinet side, and then and corresponding, we can take that same information and pass it out to our partners that are in the industry with us. So by doing that, what it does, it allows us to take a look at the threat landscape. It allows us to solve it from a Fortinet perspective and then extend it out, and helps reduce the time frame when it comes to from a response time for breaches. I think that's the key points, actually. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. So it looks like this will be the last one here, coming from Frederick, and he's asking, what do you recommend as key criteria in evaluating managed service providers?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think there's a lot at stake when you want to turn over your baby, if you will, to a third party to take care of to a large extent. And so I think some of the first things that you want to look at is their ability to scale. Particularly as it relates to managed SD-WAN type solutions. Is there already a demonstration of an ability to succeed at deploying and managing this level of technology at a large scales? It's something comparable to your own site. Has the provider already proven their ability to manage 500,000 or multi-thousands locations in a nationwide deployment? And then right behind scale in terms of credentials or street cred, if you will, is complexity. So it's one thing to just manage connectivity at 500, 1,000 locations nationwide, but what about managing the connectivity, the Wi-Fi, the voice over IP, the digital media, the security infrastructure? The idea there is to say, have they also demonstrated an ability to manage the complexity of what you have today and likely where you're going in tomorrow too as well? So I would, as I start to kind of query and start to assess different providers that are out there in the market, I would ask lots of questions about and test them for their ability to demonstrate a proven ability to scale their solution, to be able to accommodate the complexity, and then finally looking at the roadmap I mean, the world is changing. We operate in a market that is so chaotic and so dynamic. It's not enough just to simply address and meet today's requirements. There needs to be almost equal, if not more, thinking about where tomorrow is going to end up and how we prepare for it. And how do we prepare for the agility and the infrastructure so that we can actually accommodate the new things that are coming down the pipe. We don't want to have something that is critically important to our business as retailers, for example, like some IoT capability, and yet no ability to take advantage of that because the security posture of these devices is insufficient for us to protect them against as a threat to the integrity of our environments.
Awesome. Well, I wanted to thank you both again for providing your expertise today, and it looks like that's all the time that we do have. So, Tim, do you have any closing thoughts for the audience before we wrap this up?
Yeah, I think I want to thank first on behalf of Angela and myself. I very much appreciate everybody's time and attention today. This is a very interesting season to be in retail. Clearly, there is a lot of activity that is taking place, and it is a very exciting time to be in the industry. At the same time, it can be quite overwhelming. And so my encouragement here is to all of us is for some more concrete and deliberate thinking. My encouragement here is that there is a lot at stake now. The role of the retail infrastructure now is playing a first and foremost frontline impact to the human experience in the store, and that's for all of our customers, and equally important, it's also for all of our employees too as well. And the technology continues to evolve and continues to pour into our stores. My encouragement is to keep looking for solutions. Too many times as I work with retailers, it's kind of, well, this is the best I got and this is all I can do. And the world continues to evolve. New capabilities continue to emerge. And right now, this practice of retail IT, if you will, can become a very meaningful competitive differentiation. My encouragement is to keep pursuing this in the sense that we have the opportunity now on behalf of our brands to create a competitive differentiation. When we can do things to provide the kind of experience in a secure fashion with the resources that we have versus what our competitors could potentially have, it could be dramatically different from an operational perspective, from a cost perspective, from a customer experience perspective. Essentially, right now, technology drives the business of retail today, and our ability to manage technology and succeed with technology is going to be one of the key successes for our brands. And so my encouragement here is it's a very exciting time to be in the industry, and there is an enormous amount of help that's available to deal with this overwhelming obligation in front of us.